Hi everyone, my name is June, or more commonly known as Nostalgia Memoir on Instagram, and today I'm going to share with you on why I switched from a Canon DSLR to a Sony mirrorless camera. Okay, switching is not entirely true because I'm still going to keep my Canon 7D Mark II. However, I've been looking to replace my Canon 5D Mark II for several months now and decided to get the Sony instead, which is my first mirrorless camera, so it's kind of switching. Exactly 10 years ago this month, in May 2008, I purchased my very first DSLR from Circuit City, which obviously no longer exists. The camera I purchased was the Canon EOS Rebel XSI. Since my first purchase, I've been an avid Canon user, including a point-and-shoot camera, a 5D Mark II, and 7D Mark II with multiple Canon L series lenses. So not long ago, I needed to replace my 5D Mark II, and the choice for a replacement at the time was obvious for me, and it would either be a Canon 5D Mark III or a Mark IV, and I was leaning towards the Mark IV because I thought it was time for me to get the latest full-frame Canon body. Until Sony came out with the A7R III, followed by the A7RIII. Now, I'm not a professional photographer, but rather I consider myself a prosumer photographer. Because of my Instagram, I'm more broadly known as a motorcycle photographer. However, since the beginning, I've always considered myself more of a landscape and a travel photographer. And so my replacement camera would be for those specific purposes. I spent the last few months researching and watching and reading every review on the Sony A7R III and was pretty sold on the camera over the Canon 5D Mark IV. Then Sony released the A7 III, which made me do another whole research to determine which Sony A body I preferred. So this is a quick summary of why after 10 years of Canon use, I purchased a Sony mirrorless camera over a Canon DSLR. And then I'll also discuss why the A7R III over the A7 III. However, I'm not going to discuss and scrutinize the technical specs of the camera, such as dynamic range, ISO performance, image quality, and etc. Since I don't think these things matter when you're comparing such high quality cameras, that is, it's really hard to tell the difference in everyday use. What does matter are the practical functionalities that can benefit the use of the camera on a daily basis for travel and landscape photography, which is what I'll discuss. So let me first discuss why Sony over the Canon. Until Sony released its A7R III, the choice for me was obvious, which was Canon, and never really considered a mirrorless camera because of all the broadly agreed negative downside of the A7 III cameras, or just A7 cameras, such as ergonomic disadvantage, battery life, dual memory card, or the lack of lens options, and etc. But most of these issues have been resolved and then some. So here are my top reasons for choosing the Sony over the Canon as a landscape and a travel photographer. So number one reason is the weight and size. I like to think that I travel more than an average person, and I never do without my camera. Most of these travels are not the suitcase type of travel, but more of a backpack, camping, and miles of hiking. To name a few, I backpacked through 5 Southeast Asia countries over a 2-month period, backpacked multiple days through the backcountries of Wind River Range in Wyoming, did that twice, hiked through the Narrows and the Subway in Zion National Park, and recently hiked to the Havasupai in Arizona while carrying my Canon DSLR cameras. I don't think weight and size matters if you're shooting in studio or urban or casual travel environment. But if you have to hike 4 miles one way with almost 4,000 feet in elevation gain, which is what I did last year at Glacial National Park in Wyoming, then shaving off every ounce from your gears make a huge difference. Now, I'm not saying that shaving off an ounce or even half a pound from your camera is going to make that much of a noticeable difference, and it probably won't. However, shaving off a little weight from each of your travel and camera gears as a whole is going to make a meaningful difference. So my backpack when I hiked to Havasupai recently was about 50 pounds or 23 kilograms, and saving half a pound, which is just 1% of total weight from a camera, wouldn't have made any noticeable difference on my bag. But if I was able to save half pounds or less on each of my large gears, then it's a big deal. Let's say you save a little bit of weight on each of your gears by having a lightweight tent, lightweight sleeping gear, backpack, cookware, dry food, lightweight tripod, and etc. which then all this could easily add up to 5 to 10 pounds of gear weight saving. Then it does make a huge difference. So whenever I purchase a travel or camera gear, I try my best to pay a little extra to buy the lightest gear possible without compromising performance, which is exactly what the Sony A7R does, or any mirrorless cameras. Having a smaller size is less of a benefit than saving weight. It still does help pack down my travel luggage. I have backpacks ranging from 20 liters to 60 liters, and I try to take the smallest backpack possible that's still suitable for the trip, because otherwise I'll just end up packing more than I need when you have a bigger backpack. And having a smaller gear helps me to achieve that. Reason number 2, tilting screen. I lost count on how many times I had to lay on my belly or on my side to get a low angle shot with my Canon DSLRs because I had to look directly at the viewfinder or the screen to get the composition and the focus needed. This inconvenience can seem like a minor issue, but it can prevent you from getting the best shot possible, because even a few or a couple of feet difference in elevation of your camera can make a huge difference. So I was very disappointed when Canon didn't update the 5D with a tilting screen on its Mark IV. Sony A7R III's tilting screen works perfectly, as you can point the screen facing flat upward, which means you can literally put your camera on the ground and get a perfect top-down point of view, just like a waist-level viewfinder. The downward tilt only tilts out about a quarter way. This is still useful for shooting with the camera above your head, to avoid obstacles such as crowded places like a concert with people in front of you, or over fences and etc. Now the third reason is the USB charging. I love that the A7R III's battery can be charged while it remains in the camera with an external battery bank through the USB input. I've tested this, and the battery does charge while the camera is turning on and while it's being used, in addition to charging while it's off. I don't think the battery charges as fast as it's being depleted while in use. However, having an external battery connected to the camera will extend the use. This can come in very handy for situations like shooting time-lapse, which is what I do very often, and I love that I can extend the use without having an external grip or a dummy battery with an external power bank. This not only saves money, but also weight and space. Now you're probably thinking having an external bank is adding extra weight and space, but not necessarily for me, because I always carry at least one power bank to charge my other electronics. So those are my top 3 reasons. Other reasons, but not necessarily the key drivers for choosing the Sony over Canon, include pixel shift capabilities for landscape shooting, no low pass or anti-aliasing filter on the Sony, larger megapixel, which was more of a deciding factor for me when choosing the A7R III over the A7 III, which I'll discuss soon. Also, the electronic viewfinder, which I already love on the Sony, high frame per second, 10 for A7R III versus 7 for 5D Mark, which does come in handy if I want to shoot action like motorcycles and etc. I don't think the A7R III is a perfect camera, so here are a few things that I don't like about the Sony. There's no built-in intervalometer. What the f? On a $3,200 camera, they decided to exclude the simple time-lapse capability. And this is a huge disappointment since I shoot a lot of time-lapse. The big trade-off for smaller size is comfort and ergonomics of carrying the camera. My fingers can't comfortably wrap around the grip because my fingers are too long. And when I hold the camera, my pinky is left dangling because the grip is not long enough. Another reason is the limited and expensive lenses. Although Sony is coming out with a great range of lenses and Sigma is coming out with a native Sony E-mount lenses, native lens option for the Sony A7R III is significantly limited compared to that of Canon's. Additionally, Sony's professional series lenses are much more expensive, which is kind of a downside for switching from Canon lenses to a Sony lens. So the reasons I just already mentioned were the biggest selling points for me to buy the Sony camera, Sony mirrorless camera over the Canon DSLRs. However, once I made this decision, I was faced with another hard decision, which was A7R III versus the A7 III. So now I'm going to discuss why I purchased the A7R III over the A7 III. For a travel and landscape photographer, there are 4 things to consider when selecting between the A7R III and the A7 III. price, megapixel, pixel shift, and low pass filter. Not all four criteria deserve an equal weighting of importance, so after weeks of research and comparison, I came to the conclusion that spending an extra $1,200 wasn't worth the benefits of the higher megapixel, pixel shift, and no low pass filter functionality on the A7R III over the A7 III. So I was about to purchase the A7 III until I came across Dan Baller's YouTube, I think that's how you say his name, review called Sony A7R III or A7 III. Go with the R for travel and landscape photography. I'll put a link below to his review, so go check it out. Dan's review made me realize and remember that having the extra megapixel can be a huge benefit for travel and landscape photography. For the simple reason of being able to crop into your picture without losing resolution. I realized this about 5 years ago. I was visiting the Royal Palace in Phnom Penh in Cambodia. I was traveling through Cambodia with my Canon 5D Mark II with 21 megapixel. I noticed a group of monks in the far distance in front of a green construction canvas, which I quickly took the picture, but they were so far away I had to crop about 70 or 80% of the image to get the composition I wanted. Now this has become one of my top favorite travel pictures, but because of such a huge crop, I was very limited to the size I can print and display the image. This is the very reason I changed my mind and decided to get the 42 megapixel A7R III instead of the 42 megapixel A7 III, because I'm 100% sure that I will at some point need that much resolution to crop and get the best image and composition I want. So for me, that was worth the extra $1,200. Plus you do get the benefit of the pixel shift functionality and the no low pass filter. This decision only makes sense if the budget of an extra $1,200 isn't an issue. For me, that is still a lot of money, especially since I'm not a professional photographer. However, I did have the budget saved to be able to afford the A7R III over the A7 III. If I didn't, I would have purchased the A7 III and still be much more satisfied over the Canon DSLR for the early mentioned reasons. I'm fully aware that everyone has different budgets, needs, and criteria for choosing a camera, so my decision won't fully align with yours. However, I hope that my decision was able to at least help you in pointing you to a right direction for you to make your own choice. So thanks for watching, and subscribe and leave any comments or questions, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you, and you all have a good day.